When we think about modern farming equipment, safety features are a given. But there was a time when harvesting wasn't just challenging, it was downright dangerous. Today, we're going to explore 10 lethal features of vintage harvesters that, thankfully, have been relegated to the history books. The exposed sickle bar on early harvesting machines was perhaps one of the most treacherous designs in agricultural history. These razor-sharp cutting mechanisms stretched up to 20 feet wide on some models, with teeth that could slice through thick crop stems or human flesh in a fraction of a second. What made these particularly dangerous was their location. Operators had to manually clean and adjust them, often while the machine was still running. One wrong move, one slip in the mud, and a farmer could lose fingers or worse. The danger was so real that many experienced operators had their own horror stories of near misses or knew someone who hadn't been so lucky. The second deadly feature was something farmers had to endure every single day: the complete absence of operator protection. Before enclosed cabs became standard, harvest time meant being completely exposed to the elements and the machine's hazards. Picture this: you're sitting on a metal seat, no roof over your head, while your harvester kicks up clouds of grain dust and chaff. The noise from the unmuffled engine is so deafening that many operators suffered permanent hearing loss within just a few seasons. But it wasn't just about discomfort. During the summer harvest, temperatures on these exposed seats could soar past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Farmers would work 14-hour days in these conditions, leading to severe cases of heat exhaustion and sunstroke. The fine-grained dust they breathed in contained not just plant particles, but also mold spores, soil, and chemical residue. Many veteran farmers developed chronic respiratory conditions known as farmer's lung, a debilitating condition that could end a career prematurely. What's particularly striking is how long these dangerous conditions persisted. Even into the 1960s, many smaller operations were still using these open station harvesters, with operators wearing nothing more than a handkerchief over their face as protection against the dust. It wasn't until OSHA regulations and increasing awareness of long-term health risks forced manufacturers to develop enclosed cabs with proper filtration systems. The earliest grain dumping systems were a testament to both ingenuity and incredible risk. Unlike today's hydraulic systems, these mechanisms relied purely on gravity and manual operation. The grain bin, often holding thousands of pounds of harvest, would be released through a series of mechanical latches. The problem? This sudden weight transfer could violently rock the entire machine. Experienced operators tell stories of watching their harvester's wheels actually lift off the ground on one side during dumping. Even more dangerous were the partial dumps, where grain would get stuck and then suddenly break free, creating a whiplash effect that could send an unsuspecting operator flying. The hazard wasn't just limited to the operator. Ground crews working around these machines during unloading faced their own risks. When the grain finally broke loose, it could come cascading down with crushing force. There are documented cases from the 1930s and 1940s of workers being buried under sudden grain avalanches, leading to suffocation before help could arrive. The unpredictable nature of these gravity-powered systems meant that every dump was potentially dangerous, especially when dealing with damp or compacted grain that didn't flow smoothly. Speaking of bone-jarring dangers, let's talk about those merciless steel wheels. Before the advent of rubber tires and suspension systems, harvesters rolled across fields on solid steel wheels, often featuring aggressive cleats for traction. These wheels transferred every bump, every rock, and every furrow directly to the machine's frame and the operator's body. The impact could be so severe that operators reported being launched several inches off their seats when hitting unexpected obstacles. Some farmers even suffered compressed vertebrae from the constant pounding their spines took during long harvest days. The steel wheels posed another unique danger. They could become hopelessly stuck in soft soil. In desperate attempts to free their machines, operators would sometimes resort to dangerous practices like rocking the harvester back and forth or attempting to power through, which could lead to the machine flipping over. The rigid metal wheels also created deep ruts in wet fields, which then became hazards themselves for subsequent passes. During the wet seasons, these ruts could hide under standing water, creating invisible traps that could violently jolt or even tip a machine. These mechanical monsters, weighing several tons, became even more treacherous when working on hillsides. Without the grip and stability of modern rubber tires, steel-wheeled harvesters were prone to sudden slides that could quickly turn catastrophic. The combination of an unstable load of grain up high and unyielding steel wheels down low created a perfect storm of danger that claimed more than a few lives in farming's earlier days. Oh, and real quick, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button. It really helps out my channel. The mechanical clutch and brake systems of vintage harvesters stand as stark reminders of how far safety engineering has progressed. Operating these machines required not just skill, but significant physical strength. The clutch pedals often demanded so much force that operators would have to stand up and use their entire body weight to disengage them. This became particularly terrifying during emergency situations, where split-second reactions were crucial. Numerous accident reports from the 1940s and 50s detail incidents where operators, exhausted from long hours, simply couldn't muster the strength to stop their machines in time when crisis struck. The manual braking systems were equally challenging. Unlike modern hydraulic brakes, these mechanical systems use simple friction bands or drums that could wear down quickly, especially during harvest season. When working on hillsides, operators had to constantly fight against gravity, keeping one foot hovering over the brake pedal. If the machine started to roll, engaging the brake might require more strength than an operator could physically exert. Historical records show that some farmers would resort to desperate measures like intentionally driving into the ditches or fence lines when they couldn't stop their runaway harvesters on steep terrain. Perhaps even more nightmarish were the completely exposed auger systems that transferred grain from the cutting head to the storage bin. These powerful spiral conveyors, spinning at hundreds of RPM, had absolutely no protective covering in their early iterations. The danger was amplified by their placement, often at ankle or knee height, exactly where a tired worker might stumble. The augers were powerful enough to pull in loose clothing, and once caught, a person could be drawn into the mechanism in seconds. Farm safety journals from the era document horrific incidents where workers lost limbs or lives to these merciless machines. What made these open augers particularly insidious was their seeming simplicity. Many experienced farmers became complacent around them, leading to tragic accidents during routine maintenance or clearing blockages. The augers would sometimes jam with wet grain or foreign material, and clearing these clogs meant getting dangerously close to the mechanism. Even when the main drive was disengaged, stored energy in the compressed grain could cause the auger to suddenly spin free, catching unsuspected workers off guard. Some regions reported multiple fatalities per harvest season due to auger-related accidents, leading to the eventual mandate for protective shields and emergency stop systems. The hand-fed threshers and corn pickers represent some of the most hazardous agricultural innovations ever created. Workers would stand for hours manually feeding stalks and crops into these hungry machines. The rotating drums inside, studded with sharp teeth or aggressive rollers, could process thousands of pounds of crop per hour, and showed no mercy to human flesh. The margin for error was literally measured in inches, and a moment's distraction could lead to catastrophe. During peak harvest times, when fatigue set in after 16-hour workdays, these machines claimed fingers, hands, and sometimes entire arms. What made these machines particularly dangerous was the constant pressure to maintain production speed. Workers couldn't pause or hesitate. The rhythm of feeding had to match the machine's appetite. If a worker tried to clear a jam or retrieve a dropped tool, the still spinning mechanisms could grab a sleeve or glove, pulling the person into the works before they could react. Farm accident reports from the 1920s and 30s are filled with accounts of workers who lost limbs to these mechanical monsters, often working alone in remote fields where help could be hours away. The fire hazard on early harvesters was a constant, looming threat that could transform a productive day into a catastrophe in seconds. These machines were essentially rolling tinder boxes, with highly flammable materials positioned perilously close to intense heat sources. Canvas belts and wooden platforms, dried and brittle by the sun, would be mere inches from exhaust pipes that could reach temperatures over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The combination of hot, dry harvest conditions and these design flaws created perfect conditions for disaster. Fuel lines, often made of rubber or basic copper tubing, would crack or leak under constant vibration, spraying combustible fuel near red-hot engine components. The resulting fires could spread with terrifying speed, engulfing both machine and surrounding crops in minutes. Some farmers recall watching helplessly as their expensive harvesters became towering infernos, while others tell stories of desperate races to unhitch equipment before flames reached fuel tanks. The threat wasn't limited to just equipment loss. Burning combines could ignite entire fields, with fires spreading faster than horses could plow fire breaks. During particularly dry seasons, some farming communities would organize volunteer fire watches, stationing observers on high ground to spot the first signs of harvest fires. The exposed flywheels and belt systems on vintage harvesters were like giant mechanical spider webs, spinning death traps waiting to snare the unwary. These essential components, flywheels weighing hundreds of pounds and rotating at frightening speeds, alongside networks of leather or canvas belts and steel pulleys, were completely exposed during operation. The flywheels, often spinning at chest or head height, could catch a loose shirt or overalls in a fraction of a second. Once caught, the massive rotational force could pull a person in before they could even shout for help. The belt systems were equally treacherous. Running at speeds of up to 1,000 feet per minute, these power transmission networks crisscrossed the machine like deadly ribbons. The belts would often need adjusting or replacing during harvest, forcing workers to reach in among the moving parts. A moment's inattention could result in fingers being crushed between belt and pulley, or arms being wrapped around drive shafts. The sound of a snapping belt could mean not just a mechanical failure, but the whip-like action of broken belts could slice through flesh like a knife. Perhaps the most notorious killer in early farming history was the exposed power takeoff (PTO) shaft. This seemingly simple mechanical component, which transferred power from the tractor to the harvester, became known as the Widowmaker in farming communities. Spinning at up to 540 RPM, these unguarded shafts could grab loose clothing and wrap a person around them in seconds, literally in the blink of an eye. The rotation speed was so high that by the time a witness could react to someone being caught, it was usually too late. The PTO shaft's danger was amplified by its location, typically at waist height and often requiring workers to step over or near it during normal operations. The spinning motion could create an almost hypnotic effect, especially during long workdays when fatigue set in. Some of the most experienced farmers fell victim to these shafts, proving that even decades of experience provided no immunity to their deadly grasp. In winter, the danger increased as heavy coats and scarves provided more material to catch. The farming community's collective memory is marked by tragic stories of workers, young and old, who underestimated these merciless mechanisms. It wasn't until standardized shielding became mandatory that the death toll began to decrease, marking the end of one of agriculture's darkest chapters.